how to negotiate a deal priced. You guys are probably hugely experienced and know far more than I do. I've done a lot of this, but I don't pretend for one moment that I know more than you do about negotiating. I've got some tips here that I hope are hopeful, but please don't think that I'm arrogantly sitting here saying, yeah, I know everything about negotiating. Christ, there's so much involved. And again, so I'm sure some of you have done far, far more deals than I have. Be flexible and be pragmatic and be open, because there are a lot of issues in SPACs that are different than a regular company buying another company, like the commitments that they've made to their investors, the nature of the returns they need, the size of the deals they want, right? So one big constraint is that most of the SPACs are funded based on making one acquisition. They're not planning to make 6 and then pull them all together and make it kick-ass amazing. The money's there and they could do 6, right? But if you think about when they're set up with the cost and budgeting in process, budgeting the costs that goes along with doing one set of due diligence, maybe 3 times, because you kiss a frog twice and they reject them, and the third company's a charm. That's 3 serially over a period of time, right? But if instead they are going, your pitch is, well, my company's not quite that big, but kick-ass amazing it is, and this is what we could do, and bring in a couple of other companies, and now we've spent all the money you want to spend, and we've built something amazing between us. That's going to be difficult for them to bite off at first because of the extra due diligence and maybe the parallel due diligence and all of that, the excess costs involved. And then they don't actually know until they finish that if it's going to fly anyway, right? So bear in mind those kinds of constraints. So if it's a smaller deal, look for smaller SPACs, because there are those that might be a natural fit, and just be pragmatic about it. When it comes to what should the value be of your company, that's a really interesting one. It's very different than when you are dealing with venture capitalists, because in that case, the way that is, that they end up setting, if they're interested, usually they set the terms anyway. They determine how much money they're willing to put into play, which has a big role in determining the valuation they'll accept. And if you don't like it, tough luck most of the time, unless you've got a competitive, bid situation going, which is rare to say the least, but great, great when you get it. So shooting high is reasonable as long as you are not rigidly attached to a higher number. But when you think about what the dynamics are in today's market, your company might be worth this much normally and this much to the buyer in today's market because it's going to be worth this much when absorbed, when combined, right? So it's an anti-dilutive or an accretive deal to the buyer because, my God, this technology, this opportunity, the revenue upside and the profit upside is fantastic. And therefore, bigger numbers are in play today, which is a reason why the SPACs are there, because they're capitalizing on the heat in the market, and the valuations can go along with that. I already mentioned due diligence process, recognize that is a serious challenge. They didn't set it, most of them didn't plan to do multiple deals. So that's worth thinking about. Again, logistics, fitting in with the logistics of timing and other deals and so forth, which is pretty obvious. A big one that I recommend you pay very close attention to is, I'm going to assume that most of you guys here are guys and gals, are CEOs, probably the founders, but certainly CEOs of your company, and you're not used to necessarily having very powerful people on your board. Well, in some cases, you're going to have that, right? Because a lot of these SPACs, the reason they were able to raise the money in the first place is because they have names associated with them that have powerful reputations, potentially big egos, and successful careers behind them and roles in the company. So in the acquiring company. So, mapping out who is actually going to be there as a long-term participant in the combined entity and what role they will have with you matters intensely, right? I did a deal, I joined a company as its CEO, where had I met with each of the board members and thought about it hard, I wouldn't have taken the company. Instead, I was wowed by the CEO, wowed by the technology, and I was flattered by the deal I was offered, and the timing was right. It felt good. What an idiot I was, frankly, because some of those board members were alienated from me by the size of the equity package I got in the first place. I was starting from it, I was starting on the negative side of the balance sheet, as it were, from the get-go, the people that had a lot of power over me, right? So figure that out, because you may not want the deal. It may be that you would only take the deal if you can exit quickly, because you don't want to run your business with those people managing you and perhaps second guessing everything you do or some of the things you do. This is important, right? Lifestyle, your ability to excel and succeed, and the fact that you perhaps have been doing your own thing for a long time and aren't quite familiar with having to answer to people that you don't really get on very well with, right? So figure that out. It's obvious. It's negotiating the deal as to getting a success long-term and one that you can live with, not so much what the deal terms are. And this is really obvious, but I'm going to mention it because it does help some people. You'll negotiate when you actually get to the point you are negotiating. You don't want to be rude. You don't want to say, fuck off, that's not acceptable. We'll probably edit that piece out when we do the editing. But you don't want to swear at them and say a flat out no, but you also don't want to say yes, because they've reached a point where it's getting painful. What I do in that situation is I'll say, well, if I concede that, I have to do this. So it becomes a this for that deal, right? And this is stated because it's deliberately going to be something they don't want taken off the table, right? So that they understand in a more subtle manner that to get this over here, it's going to cost them that over there, and they don't actually want that. So they realize they've reached the end of the road for cheapening the deal for them, right? In a polite way that you didn't say no. Again, pretty obvious, probably remarkably obvious, but one or two of you may find that helpful. When the deal is agreed, even if it's verbally agreed, you've got it sorted, do not go back and fuck around with it. Again, another word, sorry about that. Another one, don't go back and try to squeeze more out of the deal. I was involved in a startup company that was very successful in its space. A public company approached us. The CEO, I was a major shareholder and was there from the beginning. And the CEO and the CEO of the acquiring company negotiated a deal that was very reasonable. And then the wheels were set in motion and we were heading towards the merger. And then the CEO, founder of our company, went back and tried to richen the deal in a big way. And the way in which he did it and the scale of the ask just blew the whole thing apart. So it never happened, right? He put himself in the place as being a jerk and flaky that the CEO of the acquiring company didn't want to deal with. He didn't want to have that guy in that role. It killed the whole deal, right? That's a good example of what you get if you go back and reinvent the wheel after the fact. You just got to, in most every case, you just got to kind of bite the bullet and say, hey, we negotiated it. It's not perfect, but we did this for good reason. And okay, I could kill it. I could kill it dead, but I'd rather have it. So, in most cases, goes, continue down the path